Hi everyone, this is Jewish Talk coming to you from Nassau Community College on 90.3 WHPC, also streaming on NCC Radio, one word, nccradio.org. This program is later archived on Spreaker.com. This program is repeated on Sunday evenings at 11 p.m. So hi there, my name is Rabbi Perl. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This, of course, all depends on when you are listening and joining us. So hello on the radio, hello online, and hello to the world. Today's a special day. And on this day, we greet each other in honor of the joyous holiday of Purim. Today is Purim. And therefore, I begin our program by greeting each and every one of us and wishing everybody a happy Purim. In Hebrew, we say Chag Purim Someach. In Yiddish, the traditional blessing is for a Freilichen Purim. A Freilichen Purim. Let's go and understand some of the important things of today. Purim is the jolliest day of the year. The jolly festival of Purim celebrates each year on the 14th day of the Hebrew month of Adar. This year, it began last night, Saturday night, March the 23rd, and continues through Sunday, through all day today, March 24th. Extended through Monday in Jerusalem, and we will soon explain that. What is this day? What is this celebration all about? It commemorates the salvation of the Jewish people in ancient Persia from Haman's plot. His plan was, and it was overturned, to destroy, to kill, to annihilate young and old, infants and women, all in a single day. The term Purim, a Freilichen Purim, a happy Purim, P-U-R-I-M, the actual name for this holiday, is a Persian word. Purim means lots, L-O-T-S, in ancient Persian. The holiday was thus named since the evil Haman had thrown lots to determine when he could carry out his diabolical scheme. Now you can pronounce this name many ways. In the Eastern tradition, it is called Purim. Among the Westerners, it is often called Purim. Some Central European communities even call it Purim. Now, key of the heroes of the day is Mordechai and Esther, two extraordinary individuals. Mordechai was the leader of the Jewish people in Persia at that time, and Esther was his cousin. She was forcibly made queen of Persia. Esther bravely interceded, putting her own life on line, and she interceded on behalf of her people. And therefore the story of their heroism of both Esther and Mordechai is recorded in the book of Esther. An important part of today is to hear the Megillah, as we would say, to hear the whole Megillah. In this Megillah, you have the miraculous events behind the holiday of Purim, and they're actually written in a scroll. This was as per Esther's request, that the events were written in a scroll and to be read each year on Purim. The scroll, called Megillah, Megillas Esther, was one of the final books to be canonized into the Tanakh. So a genuine Megillah must be written by a scribe on parchment, which is really a very painstaking process that takes several days or even weeks to complete. Highlighting in today's celebration, what do we do? How do we celebrate this holiday? The actual holiday is celebrated of Purim by observing 4 rituals. First of all, as was just mentioned, we read the Megillah, which recounts the story of Purim and all of the miracle. It is done once in the evening. We did this last night, and once again today. Number 2, on this day, how do we celebrate Purim? We call Matanos Le'evyonim. we give monetary gifts to at least 2 poor people. 3, the third mitzvah of the day is we send gifts of 2 kinds of foods to at least 1 person, and that is known as mishloach monot. And the 4th mitzvah of today is to have a festival Purim meal, which often includes wine or other intoxicating beverages. A key element of today is we spin a graga, which is a noisemaker. Gragas are spinning noisemakers, ratchets, usually used to drown out Haman's name as we read the Megillah. Since every word must be heard clearly, the reader repeats the name after the racket has died down. Although traditionally made of wood, gragas can be made of tin, plastic, or anything else. In a pinch, pounding on the table, stamping one's foot, or shaking one's keys will suffice. Another element of today is, as the sages in the Talmud assert, that on this day a person is obligated to drink on Purim until he does not know the difference between blessed is Mordechai and cursed be Haman. Obviously, this does not apply to anyone who may become ill or act inappropriately when intoxicated. This year, the fast of Esther took place on Thursday. Typically, it's done we precede the holiday of Purim with a fast, the fast of Esther. But this year, being that the day preceding today was Shabbos, we don't fast on Shabbos, we don't fast on a Friday in preparation for the Sabbath, and therefore it was pushed back to Thursday. Important treats of Purim is well known is the Hamantashen and Kreplach. God's involvement in the Purim miracle was hidden. It appeared as if our people's salvation came about by ways of natural means. Therefore, the day is celebrated with delicacies where the delicious filling is hidden inside the dough. The classic Hamantashen are a sweet 3-cornered pastry filled with poppy seeds, and meat-filled kreplach are traditionally also eaten, cooked and served in a chicken soup at the festival meal. Both the hamantash and the kreplach basically is dough on the outside with the meat or the delicious filling to show that on the outside it looked one way and what was the hand of God. And therefore the seeds inside the hamantashen recall also Esther's vegetarian diet in the royal palace. Why? Because she secretly kept kosher. Another key exciting element of this holiday is masquerading. People traditionally dress up on Purim, wear masks, or otherwise make themselves look somewhat unusual. Like the hidden treats that we just mentioned, many say that concealing ourselves behind a costume reflects the way God operated behind a cloak of natural events. I tend to dress up for Purim the entire year, and therefore I dress up the entire year with my black hat and beard. Also on Purim, in keeping with the over-the-top atmosphere of the day, learned people share Purim Torah, which means they combine a certain level of silliness and scholarship, meshed into a dizzying blend of witty and sometimes, overly extended theses and presentations called Purim Torah. I also want to share with you, as I mentioned, that here in the United States and around the world, today is Purim, the 14th day of Adar. That's the day, the reason why today was chosen in this whole story of Purim, that's the day when the Jewish people rested after trouncing their enemies in battle. But in the capital city of Shushan, where all of this took place, there were so many bad guys that it took an additional day of fighting to ensure their safety. So they rested on the following day, and that would be Adar 15. Since Shushan was walled, it was declared that all walled metropolises, chiefly but not only Jerusalem, would be celebrated on a later date. This second Purim, the second day, which here would be Monday, is known as Shushan Purim, in conjunction with the extra day that took to overcome the enemies in the Shushan, which was the capital of where all of this took place. Purim is celebrated on the 14th day, and Passover starts on the 15th day of Nisan. In a Jewish leap year, when there are 2 Adars, as in this year, it makes for a total of 13 months. So, as you can see, this is the second Adar, and Purim is celebrated in the second Adar. Why is that? To bring together the closest between Purim and Passover. This is so that the miraculous salvation of Purim is as close as possible to the miraculous miracle of the Exodus, commemorated and celebrated on Passover. Also interesting to know that in the early 1950s, Joseph Stalin, the ruthless butcher of millions of innocent people, had bloody plans for dealing with the Jewish problem in the USSR. Just as things were reaching a crisis point in 1953, he suddenly fell ill and died. His illness began on Purim. Another interesting point and power of Purim is that the Gulf War also ended on Purim. In 1990, when Saddam of Iraq defiantly invaded nearby Kuwait, as pressure ramped up from the international community, his army began firing Scud missiles into Israel. The Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, repeatedly assured the people of Israel that they would be protected. After the U.S.-led forces attacked Iraq, they were quickly victorious, and guess when the hostilities ended? On Purim. Let's get into a little bit more deeper now this holiday. As I mentioned, this morning, last night, we read the Scroll of Esther. If you have not had a chance to hear the Megillah, you're welcome. Check up your local Chabad, or we have a reading at 3 p.m. this afternoon. Now, if you think the Scroll of Esther is simply telling us an ancient story, think again. Queen Esther fought hard to be sure that all of her descendants would hear her timeless story. She was the one who insisted and went to the great sages of the time and said, we must have this written down in a parchment and canonized. And the truth is that the Scroll of Esther is her last lecture to us and is very especially timely today in the world that we are. As I was listening and learning and reading the Megillah, I realized that Queen Esther is whispering to each and every one of us. What do you think Esther is saying to us today? I have lived through a most difficult time. I was taken to the palace of King Ahasuerus, a Jewess, unable to reveal my identity, struggling to understand what is happening. The name of God is absent throughout the Megillah, so you may understand my life and thus contemplate your own. Think about this. You might see world events as random occurrences, but know that God is present every day, even if you cannot see him. There are times in life that you will struggle, says Queen Esther to us. Darkness will surround us. We will feel alone. I too, says Queen Esther, was an orphan, facing the world after loss. Hear my story and know that it will give you strength to endure. As in the days of Esther, Jews are facing an enemy who wants to destroy, murder, and exterminate them. This is not a new threat. Just read the words of the Purim story to recognize that this danger has been around for thousands of years. Every generation has its evil Haman. His children hate you for enduring, for not disappearing, despite their sinister plans. Whether in the city of Shushan, or the gas chambers of Europe, or in Israel, your presence did not allow them to rest. He doesn't care what type of Jew you are, if you attend synagogue or don't, how big your yarmulke, your kippah is on your head, or the level of observance. To them, you are simply a Yehud, someone they don't like. Unfortunately, there are those among the Jewish nation who stand up and renounce their Judaism, as Hollywood applauds. They turn their back on their people, revise Jewish history, and align with those who wish to throw us into the sea. They refuse to see the ocean of tears, the blood-soaked ground that gives testimony to the long-suffering of the Jewish people. This is the ultimate vandalism to the murdered souls that call out and ask us to remember, to the men, the women, and the babies who have been violated and slaughtered. I must share with you that I, who was born upon the ashes of the Holocaust, my father survived. He lost his parents, grandparents, entire family, brothers and sisters. I tremble at the thought of this unashamed desecration of those who gave their lives because they were Jews. The cries of our brothers rise from the earth. There is no peace. So when Esther is asked to enter the king's chambers and plead for her people, she initially responds, "This is not possible." She's afraid of her life. Mordecai responds, "And who knows? Maybe it was just for a time like this that you became the queen." My dear friends, every one of us, each and every one of us, have an Esther moment. Our own personal mission that can propel us to rise above the enmity and make a difference for all of us. Esther on Purim is begging us to think, why are we here? What can we do? What can we do in general and particular for the Jewish people? Do not discount the smallest acts, the seemingly insignificant mitzvah. Do not take your voice for granted. Do something. Wake up. I must tell you, it's easy to grow fatigued, to wonder how the story will end. Along comes Queen Esther and reassures us, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. See all I've gone through. I had no idea that I, an orphan, would become the queen who would help bring the rescue of our nation. Queen Esther says to us on this great holiday of Purim, don't ever give up. Remain strong. Remember, division weakens you. Haman said to himself, there's a people who are scattered and divided, spread out in all the countries. When he saw our fragmented society, he knew he had a chance to bring his plans, his evil plans, to life. It is sadly the same today. In unity there's strength. In prayer there is hope. Unity is required for our survival. Esther concludes her Megillah with a request that we all honor this day of Purim and send gifts of food to each other. Esther wanted to foster friendship amongst her children continuously. She wanted us to reach out to every type, to all of us. She asked that we extend our hands and open up our heart. This Purim, today, let's take a moment to hear the words of Esther. Let's set aside time for prayer, to plead for our people. Think of those who are hurting, the wounded in both spirit and limb. Think of their pain. Today, let's reach out to our neighbors, to our friends in our community with love. Let's bring joy into this world. With just a little bit of your light, we can push away so much of the darkness. Let's further, dive into masquerading. As I mentioned, on Purim, people put on costumes. Why? On Purim, we learn the important lesson, nothing is as it seems. The ferocious monster is really a sweet, shy Sarah from second grade. That beautiful Queen Esther with the jewel-studded crown is really your brother Moshe. Is that a gigantic three-cornered poppy seed-filled cookie walking down the street? And how did that little Michael grow that luxuriant white beard? So why do we disguise ourselves on Purim? Again, because on Purim, nothing is as it seems. Was the banishment of Vashti simply one of those things that happened when a Persian emperor gets drunk? Was it just coincidence that Mordechai happened to overhear a plot to kill the king? Did Achashverosh choose Esther to be his queen because she happened to be the most beautiful woman in the empire? Was it plain bad luck for bad Haman that he happened to come to visit Achashverosh just when the king was having Mordechai's heroic deed read to him? Was it Esther's charm and Achashverosh's flippancy that made the king suddenly hang his favorite minister? Purim was instituted because the Jewish people at the time understood that it was God himself who did all of what I've just mentioned to save his people. He was disguising himself as a Persian palace soap opera. When God took the children of Israel out of Egypt on Passover, the entire neighborhood, from Giza to Gaza, from Memphis to Mesopotamia, resonated with miracles wrought by God at that time. When a small jug of oil burned for 8 days on Hanukkah, the most skeptical of Hellenists saw that this was an act of God. Purim, which means lots, is unique in that the most miraculous salvations were shrouded, disguised in the garments of nature, luck, and coincidence. God was hidden and remained hidden. His name does not once appear in the entire Megillah. So Purim is a masquerade. Esther means I shall hide, is scrolled up. Even the poppy seed filling is barely peeking out of the folds of the doughs of the hamantash, or is it prune these days? Not to mention the wholly concealed meat, chicken filling in the kreplach. So not paradoxically, Purim is also the most joyous festival on the Jewish calendar. It's great to celebrate miracles, but how often does a miracle come our way? Far more exhilarating is the realization that nothing is as it seems, that God is always pulling the strings, even when things seem to be just happening. A person is obligated to drink today on Purim, says the Talmud, till we don't know the difference between cursed be Haman and blessed be Mordechai. There are different types of joy. There's the joy of a mitzvah. We are commanded to serve God with joy. A mitzvah performed joyously is greater, deeper, more alive than a mitzvah performed mechanically. This joy, however, is not an end in itself, but for the sake of enhancing the mitzvah. Another type of Jewish joy is the mitzvah to rejoice in one's festivals. Here, joy is not an accessory to another aim. The mitzvah itself is to rejoice. But the fact that one needs to be commanded to rejoice indicates that this is still not the ultimate joy. A greater joy is one that King Solomon speaks of when he says, The good-hearted is festive always, describing joy as a state of being rather than an activity. This is the joy experienced in the month of Adar, as explained in the Talmud. Mishenichnes Adar marbin mesimcha. When Adar commences, we increase in joy. One who is attuned to the spiritual essence of Jewish time spontaneously rejoices when entering the month of joy. Still, though, this is a conscious joy, and the very fact that a person is aware that he is rejoicing indicates that his joy is an assumed state rather than an intrinsic condition. The acme, so to speak, of joy is attained on Purim, when a person celebrates to the point until he does not know, ad lo yoda. So thoroughly does the joy of Purim permeate our souls that it doesn't know that he's or she is rejoicing. So one of the laws governing the reading of the Megillah is that one who reads the Megillah backwards has not fulfilled his obligation. The simple meaning of this law is that the book of Esther must be read in order, not say beginning with chapter 10 and ending with chapter 1. Along comes the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism, and he explains this in a more deeper significance of this law. What does it mean? One who reads it backwards has not fulfilled their obligation. And he says like this: one who reads the book of Esther backwards, seemingly just as an account of an event that happened thousands of years ago, has missed the entire point of the mitzvah of reading the Megillah. The story told by the Megillah of the hand of God concealed within the most circumstantial occurrences of a people awakening their intrinsic commitment to God and deriving from that the strength to persevere against all odds is really the story of our lives every day, in all times and under all circumstances. Now, there are numerous factors contributing to the salvation of the Jewish people from Haman's decree that we're celebrating today. Not the least amongst them is Mordechai's rousing of all of us to do repentance and Esther's efforts on our behalf. Yet the name of the festival, the one chosen to express this essence, refers to seemingly a minor detail. The fact that Haman selected the date of this proposed annihilation of the Jewish people. How did he do this? He drew lots, casting lots, pur in Persian for lot. Obviously, the significance of Haman's lots lies at the very heart of what Purim is all about. Why did Haman cast lots? Because he was attempting to break what, to his mind, was a vicious cycle that had been plaguing him and his ilk since the appearance of the Jewish people 1,000 years earlier. Many great and powerful men, from Pharaoh to Nebuchadnezzar, not to mention Haman's own ancestors, the Amalekites, had tried to destroy this people. Granted, about the personalities, but they also have an innate habit, from time to time, from doing the wrong thing. All one needs to do, it would seem, is to wait for such an opportune moment. But always at the very last minute, the Jewish people repent, and time again, God is reconciled, and things work out well. So Haman knew that there was something that he could hold over the Jewish people at that time. What was that? They had worshipped Nebuchadnezzar's idol, and they'd also partaken of Achashverosh's feast. But who knows how long their, estrangement from God will last this time. So he was looking to find a way, so to speak, to connect to something negative. So he wanted to find a way. So he drew lots, hoping to connect to a level of reality that transcends the laws of good and evil, so that the level of reality on which he believed everything's up for grabs, as free from any moral rules as like a throw of the dice. What Haman failed to realize, that when you start going to the level of the highest levels of divine choice, which transcends all logical criteria, you're wasting your time. And that's what this holiday is all about. He thought he could act into a lottery, into something higher than nature. But when you go deep into higher than nature, you encounter the soul, the essence of God. That brings us to return and forgiveness. And that's why he saw it as a Purim, but we see it as a Goyrel. That this ultimately is the very essence of the miracle of Purim, and the very essence of the miracle that we're celebrating today. Let's try to compare this holiday of Purim to the holiday of Hanukkah. Oil permeates the entire substance of a being. This is from Code of Jewish Law. The Talmud tells us, when wine enters, secret emerges. Oil is in. Oil shuns superficiality. You won't find it riding a fad or angling for a photo opportunity. When oil comes in contact with something, it saturates it to the core, permeating it in its entirety. When set aglow, oil is the master of understatement. Soundlessly, the oil burns. Not for this oil lamp that it has, the vulgar crackling of firewood, or even the faint sizzle of candle wax. Its light does not burst through the door and bulldoze the darkness away. Instead, it gently coaxes the gloom to shimmer with a spiritual luminance. Wine is a tabloid reporter. Wine barges past the security guard of mind to loosen the lips, spill the guts, and turn the heart inside out. Wine smears the most intimate secrets across the front pages of life. So again, comparing Hanukkah to Purim, and Purim to Hanukkah, Hanukkah is oil and Purim is wine. Hanukkah is the triumph of the soul. The Greeks had no designs on the body. It was the soul of Israel that they coveted, seeking to indoctrinate their minds with their philosophies and tint the spirit with their culture. And therefore, the fight in the holiday of Hanukkah was not for the freedom of a material self, but to liberate oneself from the spiritual identity and from the Hellenistic inappropriate domination. Haman and company wasn't so bothered with such subtleties. They had one simple thing, one simple goal: the physical destruction of every Jew on the face of this earth. Purim remembers the salvation of our bodily existence. Hanukkah is commemorated with oil. Hanukkah celebrates the innerness of the Jewish soul, the essence which permeates and sanctifies every nook and cranny of our life. Hanukkah celebrates the secret glow of the Spirit, which rather than confronting the darkness, infiltrates it and transforms it from within. But on Purim today, we pour out the wine. Purim is a noisy party, a showy parade, a costume extravaganza. Purim celebrates the fact that we're more than just a soul, but also have a physical side as well. Purim celebrates the fact that our Jewishness is not only in the internal spirituality, but in a very palpable reality. And this is not only that permeates our beings from within, but also spills out into the external aspects of our material lives. Taking this a step further, at the end of the Megillah, we find out that after all that Mordechai did, his peers were somewhat disapproving of him. Let me explain. Mordechai was a prominent member of the Jewish community. He was one of the leading rabbis with an important position in the grand palace of King Ahasuerus. Then, the Purim story kicks off. And as I've been explaining, the Jewish people were in grave danger. A plot had been hatched by the viceroy Haman and approved by the king to have every last Jew rid of. Mordechai enlisted the help of his cousin Queen Esther, resulting in Haman finding his worthy place on a high gallows, and as you know the rest of the story, we were saved. Now the tables are turned around completely. Mordechai was elevated to seniority in the palace and was not only able to protect us from certain slaughter, he was able to advocate for our welfare. Due to his newfound importance, the Jewish community at that time throughout the vast Persian Empire were able to enjoy a period of unprecedented prosperity and tranquility. He remained a scholar, Mordechai, a jurist, a teacher of the people, but he assumed the role of a protector as well. Therefore, at the conclusion of the Megillah, it says, Mordechai was the viceroy to the king and was great and recognized by everybody, accepted by most of his brethren, seeking the good of his people and speaking peace to everyone. Why most? Why was he accepted only by most of his brethren? Come on, look what happened. The wording most of his brethren in Hebrew means l'roi ve'echav. This is unusual phraseology. This teaches us, says the Talmud, that some of his colleagues on the Sanhedrin distanced themselves from him. The Sanhedrin was the Jewish parliament, and the high court rolled into one. Its members were the most scholarly and pious leaders, and some were unhappy with something about Mordechai. This is extremely difficult to understand. It's not unusual for colleagues to disagree, but we're talking about Mordechai, who had masterfully orchestrated the collapse of the plot to kill the Jews and had secured safety for his people. Surely, if there was a person who deserved unconditional and unreserved support, it would be this Mordechai. What could possibly justify turning against someone of this stature? Fortunately, the Talmud provides some context. Given that he was now the holder of high office, he was now less occupied with the words of Torah. To explain, the highest calling in Judaism is the study and teaching of Torah. With an empire to manage, Mordechai was much less free to dedicating himself to that noble cause. This, it seemed, rubbed some of the Mordechai's colleagues in the wrong way. The Talmud supports its contention by the fact that when Mordechai is listed with the elders of the Jewish people in the book of Ezra, he is listed fourth. And when his name appears in the book of Nehemiah, his name is demoted to fifth, signifying some reshuffling of his status. While this is an explanation of sorts, it really raises questions, more questions than answers. Mordechai was not idling his time and, hanging out there, instead of joining his colleagues in Torah discussions in the Sanhedrin. What was he doing? He was holding a high public office, using his enormous power and influence to protect his people, to advance their welfare. So how could his absence from the Torah study be remotely worthy of this rebuke? The power of this question is such that it demands a worthy explanation. The Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, introduces a brilliant insight that explains Mordechai's behavior, the positive reaction of most of his colleagues, as well as the reticence of the others. It not only explains the historic dynamic between Mordechai and the other sages of the time, it actually provides a highly relevant guide for how community leaders at any time must act in their own age. In other words, we shall now learn an entirely new way of looking at the competing worldviews of rabbis of the time, and really of all times. The Rebbe picks up on a small but telling detail. We read earlier that some of Mordechai's colleagues distanced themselves. What does that mean? They stood 6 feet apart, COVID style. We would expect that the text to say that his colleagues disagreed with him or disputed his ruling. So it seems, explains the Rebbe, that they are distancing themselves but did not disagree. Strange, no? There's nothing like a story to explain a story. The story the Rebbe tells is of one of his own mentors, the famed genius, Rabbi Yosef Rosen of Rogachev. This illustrious scholar was invited to join a rabbinic leadership committee at a time of great challenge to the Jewish people, which was the rise of communism in Russia. The animosity against religion was so intense that the Jewish faith was under imminent threat. Rabbi Rosen, who was invited to this committee, politely declined. When pressed, he cited a fine distinction in phraseology between how the sages of the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud explained the statement that pious ones of previous generations would linger in prayer for 9 hours a day. And the Talmud asks, with this amount of time dedicated to prayer, when did they have time for work? How did they find time for Torah study? Now here's where it gets interesting. The answer given in the Babylonian Talmud is, because they were pious, their Torah learning was preserved and not forgotten, and their work was blessed so they could earn a living in just a few hours. The Jerusalem Talmud gives the same answer with a tiny variation. Because they were pious, they enjoyed blessing in their Torah learning, and their work was blessed. Despite the bold, the highlight of my words, it may be difficult to detect any difference between these two versions. But the scholar that Rabbi Rosen was, he noticed the significance in the subtle deviation. The Jerusalem Talmud promises that the pious person, will enjoy blessing in his study, implying that their limited efforts to study Torah will be blessed with great success. The Babylonian Talmud makes a more modest promise that their learning will be preserved, meaning that they will not lose the learning they have already acquired, but not that they will be able to acquire new knowledge in the manner of one who devotes the entire day to Torah study. Well, the rabbi said, we all know that we rule according to the Babylonian Talmud. This means that if I join your committee, there's no guarantee that I will be able to accomplish my goals in Torah scholarship. I'm therefore inclined to demur. The difference in phraseology between these two Talmuds reflects the major difference between the culture and attitudes that prevail in the land of Israel and those that prevail outside of Israel in what we call the Jewish diaspora. The Talmud itself provides colorful portrayals of the divergences, so to speak, in the perspective between these two centers of Jewish life. One sage fasted for 100 days before traveling to study in Israel so that he would forget the learning of the Babylonian. Another sage, living in Israel, refused to speak to anyone who lived in Babylon, even if that person was a leading Torah scholar. These differences stem back to the early days when the exile from Jerusalem was conducted by the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar. The story of Purim happened broadly in the region of Babylon, outside of the land of Israel. The Sanhedrin and most of the scholars that constitute this august body were born and raised in Israel before they became part of the diaspora when the temple was destroyed by the Babylonians. So they followed the view that was later codified in the Jerusalem Talmud, that if someone dedicates time to a higher cause out of piety, their Torah study won't suffer. They therefore were in full approval of Mordechai and did not see any reason to think that his government position would take away from his greatness of the Torah. If he has less time, are we not assured that a blessing will compensate? So far, so good for those who trace their values to the teachings emanating from the land of Israel. Well, Some members of the Sanhedrin were born and raised outside of Israel and were schooled in the view that the promise to pious was limited to not losing the scholarship that they had already attained, but there was no assurance about any learning that they would miss out on. Mordechai is described as the Megillah's Ish Yehudi, a man from Judea. Clearly, he traced his roots to the land of Israel, so he felt that he was entirely in the clear, as did most of his colleagues. A small number saw it differently. They felt that Mordechai was becoming a lesser scholar due to his preoccupation with government business. They did not disagree with him per se, as they fully understood his position, but they had a different approach, the Babylonian one, and they therefore distanced themselves. This was not a disagreement as much as a divergence of approaches. Mordechai was not being rebuked or censured, but a small group of scholars considered his standing as a rabbi slightly lowered. So what can we learn from this about communal activists and scholars in our time? We have a clear majority view, espoused by Mordechai and his colleagues, that it is right to prioritize their work for the public good. Is this not going to result in neglect and diminishing of Torah study? It seems not. If their work for the public good is motivated by noble intentions, they will find blessing in everything they do. Their Torah learning will flourish in whatever time they are available to dedicate to it. We all have to find the right balance between our own growth and the responsibilities to help others, which is something extraordinarily important in our time as we go about life and making priorities to balance between the time that we study and the importance of our impact on the world around us. And even if that takes longer than our study, but if it's done sincerely about helping the world around us, we will find blessings not only in what we do know already, but we also will be able to catch up as well in our learning as well. Well, since Purim is a story about a Graga, let me tell you a little story. One Purim many, many years ago, in the little town of Vardik, in the far-off Russia, everyone was very sad and worried. Instead of looking forward to the joy of the holiday, they were afraid that the entire community would be destroyed. It was almost like the times of the first Purim. That's how dangerous it was. The son of the great powerful Tsar had gone hunting in the woods with a group of friends. They had lost their way and by chance arrived in the town of Vardik. All the people were excited to have this distinguished visitor in their midst. They gave him the finest room in the local inn, the finest food, and delicacies and delicious cakes. The next day, the prince suddenly became very ill and was unable to return home. Message was sent to the Tsar to report the bad news. In a very short time, the Tsar and several important ministers arrived in Vardik. They had brought several doctors with them, who immediately began to examine the prince. Everyone tried to cure him, but none was successful. The prince was moaning in pain. His face was flushed, and he was burning with fever. Most of the time, he slept. He refused all food and drink. His very life was in danger. And then one of the ministers said this was the fault of the Jewish community, that the prince was sick, because they gave him bad food. This is, of course, ridiculous and untrue. But everyone was so worried about the sickness of the prince that they believed him. Unfortunately, many times in history, when there's any kind of trouble, rotten people place the blame on innocent Jews. And so the Jews of Vardik were very frightened, for they knew that their lives may be in danger. On the day before Purim, 2 notices were put up on the trees. They said that if the prince did not recover by the end of the next day, everybody would be held, all the Jewish community would be held responsible. And also, since the prince is very weak, everyone had to be quiet. But the Megillah had to be read. The Jews gathered silently in the little synagogue in the main street, right near the inn where the prince lay gravely ill. Everyone in the shul was told to sit absolutely still, for the rabbi to read in a very soft voice, to read the Megillah. The children had been told to leave their gragas home, for the notice had requested silence. Okay? The father, a graga, of course, is a noisemaker, which is usually used in reading the Megillah. Whenever the name of Haman, the wicked Haman, is mentioned, the children swing their graggers and make a noise like you can't imagine. The fathers looked very serious and sad. The mothers also were crying. There was no feeling of Purim in the air, that's for sure. Suddenly there was an awful noise. The name of Haman had been read. Little Yaakov was swinging his gragger with all of his might. Happily, with a big smile on his face, he was swinging that gragger. Everyone was very frightened. The rabbi continued reading. People were shaking their heads. They made signs to Yaakov that he must be quiet. One man wanted to take the grag away from him, but Yaakov would not let him even touch it. Everyone was afraid that Yaakov would scream and make a lot of noise if he was forced to give up his gragger. So he was allowed to keep it. No one could tell him to stop using the gragger. For during the reading of the Megillah, it is forbidden to speak. They were hoping that Yaakov would understand and put his gragger away. The windows to the prince's room was open to let in some fresh air. Gathered around his bed were the ministers, the doctors, and the Tsar. There was total silence in the room. The prince was pale and weak. He had no strength left. His eyes were closed, and he seemed not even to be breathing. What was that? Who dared to break the rule of the silence? All the people in the room ran to the window to see who the guilty one was. The next moment, they jumped in fright, for they heard a voice behind them asking for some water. There was the prince, sitting in bed, wide awake. What a jolly noise I hear! What is it? Please bring me some water. I've never been so thirsty in my whole life. Hurry, please, I feel so dry. Guess what? The noise of the gragger had awakened the prince. In a few days he was well, and the whole company returned in peace to the palace. Everybody in the town was saved, and they had the happiest Purim you can ever imagine. And guess what? Yaakov, the little boy, was the hero of the day. People hugged him and kissed him. They gave him so much nash that he had enough to eat until Passover. My friends, as we celebrate Purim today, let us remember some of the messages and some of the insights that I've fortunately been able to share with you today and make this day different. Perhaps this is the first time you're hearing about Purim. Maybe there was no plans, you didn't know it was Purim, or maybe there were no plans to celebrate. I urge everybody today listening, please check out your local synagogue, your local temple. Find out what maybe they're having a late Megillah read. Maybe they have some celebrations, some festival Purim gatherings. Exchange gifts of food with friends, Shalach Manos. Put aside money for the poor people. Let's get into the holiday, the spirit of Purim, and recognize that in so many ways, the world is a masquerade. The world really isn't the way, this one interprets it or this pundit interprets it. We must remember that in everything that we do, the hand of God is behind everything. As I mentioned, that there's a lot of talk about the upcoming of the sun, the eclipse of the sun. What is the eclipse? Basically, the moon gets in the way, stops the light of the sun to shine. The sun does not change. Just for that moment, there's a concealment of the sun to a degree. We too must appreciate. Purim reminds us, look at the world out there. Things seem to be so concealed, just like the moon. It's in front of the sun. But we all know behind that moon that's created this eclipse, there really is the sun, bright and strong. And we ought to remember that even in these very difficult times for the whole world, there may be an eclipse, but it's only a concealment. But the hand of God, the brightness of God, the blessings of God, just as in the metaphor of a sun, the sun in the sky is burning brightly. And with God's help, we will all very speedily see the end of all the troubles of the world, and all the world will be filled with goodness and kindness, joy, simcha, gladness, and all the blessings in the world for everybody. This is your host, Rabbi Perl, thanking you so much for joining us and wishing everybody a happy Purim, a freilichen Purim, Chag Purim Sameach.